Hey friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Bianca, and today I came to a realization that the internship season is probably coming soon for many of you, maybe in a month or two. So I thought of sharing some of my tips and advice on how you can secure full-time job offers from your internships. Because, well, I've been in your shoes before. You can definitely trust me to know the enthusiasm and anxiety that comes along with this journey very, very well. I personally have completed 4 internships across 4 different industries, or technically sectors, whichever you may want to call them, during my university days. My first one was in research, or technically academia, where I basically interned at a lab in Singapore during my first year summer holidays. Meanwhile, my second internship was in strategy consulting, where you can basically imagine me playing a lot with Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint for 3 months during my second year summer break. Whilst for my final year of my undergraduate degree, COVID unfortunately happened, but I was still lucky enough to have secured a summer internship with a tech startup in London, where I basically worked remotely with the team for a few months and across my masters as well. And last but not least, for my final internship before I officially graduated with my masters, I interned at a regional venture capital firm that invests into startups in China and Southeast Asia. Overall, I would say that I have been pretty fortunate to have had a really pleasant experience for all of my internships, and with some luck, I am really grateful to have been offered full-time job offers from all of the company internships. So, with all of these internship experiences, and just like any other parts of my personal life, I have gotten some things right, and I have also made my share of mistakes. Hence, I always believe that it would be a good idea for me to just share some of the things that I reckon would be best practices for you at work, so that you can become a much better intern than I was. And I hope that my sharing could be pretty helpful for you, regardless of whichever industry that you're interning at, or whichever stage in life you happen to be at. So do take note that I'm actually not a human resource professional. These are just perspectives from a former intern, so some of my advice could be advice depending on the situation. With that, I am always open to hearing other points of views as to how we can all become better interns, so feel free to jot down your thoughts in the comment section down below, because I am always happy to learn. Plus, I'm pretty sure that everyone can also benefit from your tips as well. But before we dive into the advice side of things, I reckon it's always a good idea for us to just get a decent understanding of why companies offer internships in the first place. So, depending on the industry and the size of your company that you're interning at, I would say that we could broadly categorize the reasons for internships into 3 different buckets. They might sound a little sarcastic. Part of it is just for me to be as honest as possible, so please bear with me on that. So for the first bucket, you could technically equate your internship to an extended job interview. It's kind of like the company paying for a trial period of working with you, just like how we will all sign up for the 1-month free trial of accessing things like Spotify, Netflix, or Canva. And the whole idea of that is really for the company to just get an idea of whether you can actually do the job, as well as just blend in well with your colleagues. Meanwhile, amongst more established firms such as the multinational corporates, they could actually use the internship period as a time to train a cohort of people up for full-time roles. In this case, you could sort of imagine your internship to be some sort of training bootcamp where you're taught all the basic skills required for you to succeed in a full-time role at that firm. The third bucket, on the other hand, as to why companies offer internships is because, well, it hurts the wallet less. This scenario is usually more applicable to startups or small to mid-sized companies, where hiring full-time employees is typically too expensive. For that reason, they would hire lots and lots of interns to compensate for the necessary manpower. In such cases, I wouldn't be too surprised if someone were to tell me that these sorts of companies would expect you to just add value almost immediately with bare minimal training. So now that we have gotten an overview as to some of the general reasons as to why companies offer internships, let's now link it to the advice that I'd like to share as to how you can secure full-time job offers for your internships. To begin with, I'd like to separate my advice into 2 categories. One concerning things that you could do before you start your internship, whilst one concerning things that you could do during your internship. Now, when it comes to stuff that you could do before you start your internship, the first important thing will be for you to just familiarize yourself with the field or industry as well as the job that you'll be embarking on. And there are many ways for you to do so. For instance, I personally sent an email to my recruiter and direct supervisor asking them for recommendations on books, computing skills, or anything that I ought to familiarize myself with before I begin my internship. And honestly, I really think there is absolutely nothing for you to be shy about, because I'm pretty sure your direct supervisor will be more than happy to spend 5 minutes to just share what he or she thinks could make you a better employee to them. The key objective here is really for you to just pick up the skills and knowledge that you can't exactly acquire immediately on the job. And overall, I would say that your future self is pretty likely to thank you for that, because it's a much safer strategy compared to just walking in on day one completely unprepared and therefore feeling really overwhelmed when all the information gets thrown at you. For my second tip, practice public speaking. Try to find opportunities to address small to mid-sized groups so that you can get used to groups of strangers having their eyes completely trained on you. And hopefully, your confidence and communication skills will develop with each experience. I don't lie, I used to hate that with a passion. Part of it was because I suffer from social anxiety and therefore wasn't the biggest fan of being the center of attention. But the biggest turning point I had was when I basically got stage anxiety during one of my first internships. And to give you an idea of how bad it was, I basically couldn't even look at my supervisor's eye when I was presenting an idea. Fortunately, my supervisor was actually kind enough to call me out on that during the early days. And an important feedback he shared was that without public speaking, you won't be able to communicate your great ideas to others. And since we both shared an interest in philosophy, he went on to elaborate. So, we are all familiar with the phrase, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there to hear it, did it make a sound? Now, to put it in this context, if you have a great idea but couldn't communicate it well to the audience, does it really exist in the eyes of the audience? With that, work on your communication skills. So, those are the tips on things that you could do before your internship. Moving on to the stuff that you could do during your internship. Well, honestly, that's plenty. The first piece of advice is probably one of the most important ones shared by my friend's martial arts teacher, and I personally also think that it's a pretty timeless advice. Basically, leave your ego at the front door. I completely understand the job hunting angst, so it is perfectly normal for new recruits to just want to prove their worth. But I noticed that it can sometimes get to a point where people just try their very hardest to just appear perfect and extremely knowledgeable in front of others. Yet the harsh truth that we all also have to accept is that things may not always go our way, and we may not always get everything right the first time. And that's actually perfectly okay. So besides showcasing that you're good at your job, it's also pretty important to show that you're a very coachable person and someone who is self-aware about their own shortcomings. I have messed up before, and I've also had times where my manager gave me brutally honest feedback on things that I haven't really done well on. And I also have had managers telling me off on things that I really screwed up on. It hurts, yes. But remember that learning is an ugly journey anyway. Hence, it's really important for you to just be willing to look like a fool from time to time, and also to be really accepting of constructive criticism that gets thrown at you. Just make sure that you don't beat yourself up too much or to get overly defensive whenever you happen to screw up at any point in time during your internship. Next on the list, get to know everyone. Like, literally everyone. It doesn't matter if it's just the receptionist at the lobby, a partner at the firm, or someone from the other department, or heck, the janitor who just comes to clean your desk every morning. You're in a team and everyone has a role to play. So there's a lot that you can learn from each person, no matter their position or job title. On top of that, take time to understand your company, industry, or even client's culture. Aim to quickly familiarize yourself with the unwritten rules of the workplace, the management style of your supervisors, or if you're really willing to go the extra mile, try to just make an educated guess on your colleague's love language. Oh, okay, well, care language if that sounded a little too weird. All of these, in turn, will just help you to contribute to your team in a much more effective manner and to just build closer relationships with your colleagues. And the simplest way to get to know your colleagues is to initiate things, strike conversations, create banter, tell jokes, share food, invite them to coffee or dessert after work, get them to share their war stories over lunch, offer to help others if they're struggling with their workload. All of these are just some of the random ideas on top of my head as to how you could just get closer to your colleagues. After all, and if you think about it, you are probably going to spend quite a lot of time working with them if you're going to be joining the company as a full-time employee. Plus, they are all human beings at the end of the day, and I've never seen a human being who actually doesn't love to laugh or want a job that they could actually look forward to every single day. For my third tip, take notes like a scientist. Carry a physical notebook with you, or at least a pen or paper, or a phone, whichever that works for you really. The whole point is really for you to be able to take notes quickly whenever you came across an interesting insight mentioned by someone, or a jargon that you may not entirely understand, or anything that you feel would be worth researching into later on. Besides that, I also find it to be a pretty effective way for me to just quickly remind myself of the topic that was previously discussed when I re-look into my notes later during the day. Moving on to my fourth tip, be bold in voicing out your thoughts and what you know about a subject. Well, for some context, I'm a little bit of a psychology geek, so I would really encourage you to read up on this thing called the common information effect and how it can cause discussion bias. It turns out that in teams, we tend to overwhelmingly discuss common information rather than raising any uncommon, meaning unique pieces of information. Why? Two key reasons. The first one being probability, as in this simply happened by chance. But the second reason gets a little more interesting because discussing shared information feels good. And a lot of this emotional high gets driven by the effects of mutual enhancement. For instance, try to imagine a time where you brought up a discussion point during a meeting and everyone in the room just went like, oh yeah, I heard about that too. And with that, everyone just started to smile and nod. Chances are that you will feel smart and validated as opposed to bringing out a unique piece of information that doesn't get reciprocated by others, and that is called confirmation bias. In short, the main point that I'm really trying to bring across here is that discussing common information is often perceived to be more accurate, more important, and more decision relevant as opposed to discussing uncommon information. In fact, there are multiple case studies where team members are judged to be more task competent and much more credible whenever they raise common information rather than discussing uncommon information. As a result, the group decision quality takes a hit, and these groups will oftentimes miss the optimal solution. In essence, I wanted to share this with you because being aware of this phenomenon essentially made me less afraid to just share what I know regarding a specific topic during group meetings. What's more, this brings me to highlight that your ideas and opinions matter even if you have intern as your job title. You may know something crucial that the team doesn't, and this can at times make or break the decision quality, and more of the times for the better rather than the worse. For my next tip, I would like to cite a Substack article that I came across, link in the description. And the whole notion that this article was trying to bring across is that if you want to be the best employee, or in your case, the best intern, you got to either be the star or be the janitor, which in this context just means do the work that either one, no one else can do, or two, no one else wants to do. Or in a super ideal situation, try to be both. So how to figure out what it means to be a star in your team? It's pretty simple. Just ask your manager one simple question. In the past, what have interns done without being explicitly asked to that you felt to be above and beyond for the team? And hopefully, your manager will be able to give you a rough idea of their typical expectations for interns, and that will be a very good metrics for you to try to exceed your expectations on. Whilst to figure out how to be a janitor, I would say this is a pretty simple approach. Try to observe for the necessary evils that your colleagues complain about having to do every other day or every other week. Once you've figured those out, try to offer help to your colleagues to relieve their pain points. For instance, I have had a colleague who didn't really enjoy taking meeting minutes, although it is something necessary. So I eventually came up with the idea where we both take turns to jot down the meeting minutes so that this trouble wouldn't be placed completely on one person. Either way, the whole point of being the star or the janitor is for you to transform into a person who makes your manager and your team's lives easier. And this indirectly makes you a little more indispensable to your team. But the catch is that before you take up any additional work, make sure that you're doing what you're assigned to do originally perfectly. Don't add anything to your plate if that would mean having to mess up the work that you're initially taking charge of. So consider the star or janitor role to be more of an add-on rather than a necessity if the initial workload is already pretty heavy for you. Now, for my final tip, I would say that this is something that could make your internship much more entertaining, and that's why I would always strongly encourage you to do so. And that would be to be an entrepreneur and solve problems. You are probably wondering, what the heck is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur, as defined by MIT, is basically someone who thinks and acts like an entrepreneur within a company or an organization. And I would say that it's something worth trying out for two key reasons. Number one, it helps you to think like a company owner. And because of that, it leads to two, it helps you to stand out amongst the crowd. Put simply, every company, no matter how big or small it is, how prestigious or how unknown it is, will have flaws in their system. And these flaws may cause problems or inefficiencies in the long run if they were to be left unaddressed. Now, assuming a company owner will always want the best for their firm, this would mean that they will always need to devise ways for them to get rid of or just minimize the problems so that these wouldn't snowball into bigger issues in the long run. So, one of the best ways for you to learn how to solve problems is to invest some time to understand how the company operates. Speak to your team members. Ask them questions as to what sort of problems or inefficiencies that they face on a regular basis. Try to understand how do they typically approach problems or why do they do things in a certain way. And then through that, consider how could the team try to improve their solutions. To give you an example, at the venture capital firm that I intern with, given that VC teams are typically really lean, meaning that there's just not many people on the team, this would mean that there is really limited time and manpower for them to train interns. As I learned about this issue, this gave me the inspiration to just draft and propose an intern guidebook where I wrote down all the different learning takeaways that I had during my internship so that I could help facilitate the onboarding process for future interns. As you can see, the solution that I proposed is a pretty simple one. I didn't have to code an app or redesign a completely new system in order to so-called stand out. All you really need to do is to just pay attention to the problems that you may witness on an everyday basis and to just come up with ideas as to how your firm could resolve them. And maybe, just maybe, your supervisor may actually take up on it. Overall, I could even argue that thinking like an entrepreneur could actually help you to draw meaning from your job and to develop a genuine interest in your work. And that is never a bad thing. So those were the tips and advice on how you could actually secure a full-time job offer from your internship. Before I end this video, I have a few final thoughts to share that I feel will be worth keeping in mind. The first and foremost is for you to always remember that your internship is a two-way street. More often than not, many of us, myself included, tend to forget that the internship isn't just a season for the company to decide on whether you are a good fit for them, because it is also a time for you to decide whether the company is a good fit for you. For example, some of the areas that I take into consideration when I'm trying to decide if that industry or office is something that is suitable for me in the long run, I would just try to ask myself really honest questions such as, is this industry something I'm actually interested in? If so, can this office actually give me the exposure I need? Or things like, do I click with the team that I'm working with? Can I stand working with them every day for at least a year? Do I align well with my manager's approach to leadership? Can I put up with working with him or her as a direct report? How is my job affecting my lifestyle? Am I working to the point where I have basically no life outside of work? And if that's the case, am I actually okay with that? There's absolutely no right or wrong answer for any of that, but your responses can help you to determine if you're going to be a good fit for a full-time position in that industry and that particular office that you're interning at. And for whatever reason, if something just doesn't feel right for you, that's perfectly okay. Don't feel like you have to force yourself into a mold if the workplace and job scope just doesn't quite suit your strengths and personality, because there's just so much opportunities out there for you to explore, and they might be a bit more suitable for you. I have friends who didn't manage to secure full-time job offers from their internships, and I also have friends who actually rejected their full-time job offers because they knew that somewhat deep inside they actually didn't enjoy their internships. And everyone, at least from the last time I checked up on them, is actually doing pretty fine right now, regardless of the situation. So getting that full-time job offer shouldn't really be seen as the be-all and end-all of your life story. In fact, it is barely the beginning. All in all, try to enjoy the ride while you're at it. Make a mistake or two. Figure out what you like and don't like about the company and the job. Be honest with yourself about that. And to a large extent, I would actually encourage you to just trust your gut. On top of that, here's an open secret about most companies. To be really honest, you've technically gotten a job when you join as an intern, because most of the time, most companies would much rather convert their interns to full-time employees as opposed to repeating the entire recruiting process again. And this practice makes a lot of sense because the internship should have basically given the company a really good idea of how it's like to work with you. So logically speaking, it's a far lower risk as well as a cheaper option for them to just hire you straight away rather than risk bringing in a wildcard employee that they haven't actually worked with before. This leads me to say that the true goal of your internship is to actually not lose your job offer. How to do so, you may ask? It's honestly pretty easy. Just make sure that you maintain a strong work ethic and to not be a mean person, like don't be an a-hole honestly. And for the majority of time, you'll probably be fine. So calm down on that. Like seriously, calm down. Now, I'm aware that there are certain internship programs that are actually competitive, such as those offered by investment banks, where a selected few individuals from an internship cohort are actually selected to be given a full-time job offer. I still hope that this doesn't actually deter you from collaborating with others and to try to get to know your peers as people. That basically leads me to my final tip, and that would be to try to build genuine relationships during your internship. It's a pretty small world out there, especially when we have technology connecting all of us together. You can never know when you'll be seeing your peers again, even if everyone went on their separate ways after the internship. For me, I still keep in contact with my peers from my previous internships, and this led to really fun things. So for instance, I went for a trip to Winter Wonderland with one of my friends just because we wanted some Christmas vibes. And when one of my peers from Singapore actually came to visit London, we just went out to have loads of ice cream. But most importantly, they helped to make my internship so much more entertaining. So now that we have arrived at the end of this video, I hope to just highlight that the whole point of this is not to cause any forms of stress or anxiety, because I understand that it was a lot to take in. As a matter of fact, I would say that most of my learnings actually came from the far too many slip-ups I had across all of my internships, and these, ironically, enabled me to actually make this video. Who knows? Perhaps you'll actually uncover something that wasn't really discussed in this video through your own mistakes. And this is where I would actually strongly encourage you to pay for it by adding your own learning takeaways in the comment section down below, so that the next intern could benefit from both of our learnings. Till then, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. If you found it to be helpful or something really entertaining to watch for whatever reason it is, I would really thank you from the bottom of my heart if you could just hit the like, subscribe and bell icon. If you're interested, I have actually made another video where I talked about my learning takeaways from my venture capital internship in specific. So do check it out if you happen to be curious about it. And like I always said, just try to take it easy there, enjoy the journey, and all the best really for your internship. Bye!